The Young and the Restless Spoilers here is a dramatic and emotional continuation of your plot involving Sharon, Mariah, Cole, and the tensions in Genoa City, designed to keep readers hooked as the story unfolds with anger, confrontation, and a fierce need for justice. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air thick with anticipation as Mariah Copeland stepped up to the stand. The moment had arrived for her to finally expose the truth about Cole Howard, the man who had manipulated and deceived her, and the man who had left her with nothing but guilt and confusion. Her heart raced, not just from the fear of speaking out but from the overwhelming anger she had held in for so long. Sharon, her mother, sat just behind her in the courtroom, her face a mixture of disbelief and burning determination. Sharon had been by Mariah's side every step of the way, supporting her as she tried to reconcile the truth of what had happened with the devastation it caused. But Sharon, as a mother, couldn't just sit idly by. She had seen the pain in her daughter's eyes, and now, with the truth about to be laid bare for everyone to hear, Sharon's maternal instinct was on full display. Mariah began her testimony, her voice shaking at first but growing more resolute as she recounted the night in Paris, the night that had changed everything. She spoke of how Cole had taken advantage of her, how he had used her vulnerability to manipulate her, and how his actions had left her feeling broken and betrayed. Every word she spoke cut through the room, each sentence filled with a mixture of anger and pain. The courtroom fell silent as she laid out the truth, not just about what had happened between her and Cole, but about the man he had become. And now, Mariah continued, her eyes never leaving Cole, he pretends to be the victim. He lies, he manipulates, and he hides behind a facade of illness to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. What kind of man does that? Her voice broke on the last sentence, but the anger in her eyes burned bright. As she finished, the room erupted in a murmur of disbelief and anger. The evidence was damning, the testimonies were hard to deny, but there was still something missing, something that Mariah needed to truly break Cole's hold over her life. And then, as if the tension wasn't enough, the door to the courtroom opened, and Sharon entered. She had been quiet until now, watching the proceedings from the back, but now, with the weight of her daughter's words settling in, she could no longer stay silent. Sharon had been pushing her anger down for so long, but seeing Cole sitting there, pretending to be ill, pretending to be innocent, was more than she could bear. Without a word, Sharon moved toward the front of the courtroom, her eyes locked onto Cole, her rage palpable in every step she took. The tension in the air doubled, and before anyone could react, Sharon crossed the room and slapped Cole across the face with all the force her anger could muster. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and for a moment everything froze. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of those who had witnessed the scene unfold. Cole, stunned, blinked rapidly, his hand instinctively going to his face as he looked up at Sharon with a mix of shock and disbelief. "You don't get to pretend anymore," Sharon hissed, her voice low but filled with venom. "You don't get to hide behind your illness and your lies. You are a coward, Cole, and I won't stand by and let you destroy my daughter any longer." The words were like a declaration of war, a line in the sand that Cole couldn't ignore. Mariah watched her mother, her heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. She had always known Sharon was strong, but seeing her mother fight for her in such a raw, unflinching way, made Mariah feel a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt before. Sharon wasn't just standing up for her daughter, she was standing up for the truth, for justice, and for the future they both deserved. As the courtroom slowly regained its composure, the judge cleared his throat and signaled for order. But the damage had been done. The public display of Sharon's fury had shattered any remaining illusion that Cole could somehow escape the consequences of his actions. Cole, still reeling from the slap, finally spoke, his voice shaky. "You don't understand. I'm sick. I can't deal with all of this." His words were a mix of desperation and deflection, trying to avoid the truth by hiding behind his illness. But it was no longer enough. "Lies," Sharon spat, her words filled with contempt. "You've been using your illness as a shield, but it's clear to everyone now that you're just running away from the truth. You're not sick, Cole. You're a coward who doesn't want to face what you've done. The room was filled with murmurs again, this time with a new sense of realization. The audience, once uncertain of the facts, now seemed to be on Mariah and Sharon's side. There was no more room for doubt. Cole had been exposed for the manipulator he was. But the real question was what would happen next. Cole, realizing the walls were closing in on him, finally stood, his face flushed with both anger and humiliation. He didn't look at Mariah or Sharon but instead turned his eyes to Victoria and Claire, who were sitting nearby. Victoria, who had been staunchly defending Cole until now, looked shaken, her brow furrowed as she processed the new reality in front of her. Claire, too, was quiet, her eyes wide, filled with confusion and disbelief. But it was Nick who finally broke the silence, his voice cold and resolute. Cole, you've hurt my daughter. You've lied, manipulated, and caused pain to those who trusted you. You will pay for this. His words were an unmistakable declaration. Mariah looked at her father, her heart swelling with gratitude and relief. Nick's protective instinct had been triggered, and nothing would stop him from ensuring that justice was served. In that moment, as the courtroom filled with the sounds of shocked whispers and the weight of the truth settled in, it was clear that Cole's days of hiding behind his lies were numbered. His manipulations had been exposed, and the consequences of his actions were coming for him, whether he was ready or not. Sharon's slap, though a brief moment of fury, had marked the beginning of Cole's unraveling. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back now. Mariah, despite the pain, had stood up for herself, and with her mother's support, she had taken back the power Cole had tried to strip from her. And now, the final pieces of his manipulation were falling apart, and the consequences of his actions were going to catch up with him in ways he could never have imagined. Here is an intense and emotional continuation of your plot, focusing on the courtroom drama, Cole's defense, Victoria's shock, and the ongoing conflict between Cole and Mariah. This narrative delves deeper into the psychological manipulation, the struggle for justice, and the power of truth in a high-stakes legal battle. The tension builds, with each character facing difficult decisions and confrontations. The courtroom buzzed with nervous anticipation, the weight of the case hanging in the air like a storm about to break. The tension was palpable, thick with the emotions of those involved. The betrayed's loved ones, and the one accused of causing the damage. Today, Mariah Copeland's truth would either be confirmed or crushed, and the world of Genoa City was waiting to see which way it would go. Mariah had taken her stand, exposing the pain and manipulation she had endured at the hands of Cole Howard. Her testimony had been raw, filled with the bitterness of betrayal, the weight of guilt, and the quiet determination of someone who finally wanted justice. She had stood strong, but even as she spoke, there was still that nagging question, would there be enough proof? Now, as Cole took the stand, the mood shifted. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. He was no longer the confident, charming man he had once been. Now, he was a man backed into a corner, doing everything in his power to claw his way out. The lawyer for the defense, his own representation, had painted him as the victim, someone falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. The only problem was, his story was beginning to sound more like an excuse than a defense. Cole took a deep breath and looked at the courtroom with a sense of feigned calmness. He needed to convince everyone that Mariah had misunderstood, that the events that transpired between them were nothing more than a temporary lapse in judgment, both of them under the influence of alcohol. He had to make everyone believe that nothing sinister had occurred. Yes, I did meet Mariah in Paris, Cole began, his voice steady but tinged with a slight tremor. We had a few drinks together, talked about our lives, and shared some moments. But after that night, we went our separate ways. I didn't see her again. That's the truth. He paused, watching the faces of the court, most of them skeptical, some still processing his words. Victoria's eyes were wide with disbelief. She had spent years supporting Cole, trusting him, believing in his integrity. But now, she was starting to see through the cracks in his facade. What about the rumors, Cole? Victoria's voice cut through the silence. What about Mariah's claims that you took advantage of her? I didn't do anything wrong, Victoria, Cole said quickly, almost defensively. I don't know where all this is coming from. She was intoxicated, and I never took advantage of her. We just had a drink, and then we parted ways. No harm was done. Sharon, who had been sitting near the back of the courtroom, could barely contain herself. She stood up, her voice loud and furious as she interrupted Cole's defense. Lies. All of it. You hurt my daughter, and you're sitting here trying to lie your way out of it. You know exactly what you did to her. The judge banged his gavel, restoring order, and Sharon sat back down, still fuming. The court was silent again as Cole continued his testimony. I don't know what happened to Mariah after we parted ways, Cole said, his tone shifting slightly, as if he were uncertain about his own words. But I do know that someone else must have hurt her. There was another man there, an older man, with silver hair. He was with her that night. Maybe he's the one who did this. But not me. I didn't hurt her. The courtroom was stunned. The insinuation that someone else was responsible for Mariah's trauma was a twist that no one had expected. Mariah, sitting at the back of the room, felt her stomach churn. Silver hair? Was Cole really trying to shift the blame onto another person entirely? Was he so desperate to escape his guilt that he would invent an entirely fabricated story? She could feel the weight of his words digging into her chest, and the anger in her soul grew stronger. Victoria, who had been silent up until now, could no longer contain her fury. Cole, you're a liar, she spat. I can't believe you're doing this. How dare you put the blame on someone else when it's clear to everyone here that you're the one who hurt her? How could you? After everything you've done? Mariah stood, her fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't stand to hear any more of his lies. No one else did this to me, Cole. It was you. It was always you, she said, her voice trembling with anger and pain. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned to her. She was shaking, the words she had held back for so long now spilling out in a flood. I don't need your excuses. I don't need you to lie and pretend like nothing happened. I know the truth. I remember enough to know it was you. You took advantage of me when I was too drunk to defend myself, and you've been running from that responsibility ever since. Cole's face twisted into a mix of anger and guilt, but he didn't speak. He just stared at Mariah, his expression faltering for a moment before he quickly masked it again with indifference. But then, it was clear, his defense had crumbled. Without the evidence he needed to back up his story, his claims fell flat. The truth had been exposed, not just by Mariah's words, but by the undeniable evidence of his own actions. It wasn't just about the alcohol anymore, or the mistaken intentions. It was about what he had done, what he had been trying to cover up. Cole, the judge said sternly, his voice echoing in the room. You have failed to provide sufficient evidence to refute these claims. Your attempts to shift blame onto others have only weakened your defense. This court will consider the full weight of Mariah's testimony as we deliberate. Cole's face paled. His facade had cracked, and the consequences of his actions were now glaringly apparent. His illness, his claimed sickness, wasn't the cause of his downfall. It had been his inability to take responsibility for what he had done. The consequences of his actions were now inevitable, and there was no more running from the truth. But even as the reality of his situation began to sink in, Cole was still clinging to one final hope, that Victoria would somehow believe him, that she would see past his faults and find a way to forgive him. But Victoria, standing resolutely in the courtroom, couldn't bring herself to do it. She couldn't overlook the pain he had caused Mariah, and she couldn't forgive the betrayal he had placed on her daughter's shoulders. Cole, Victoria said, her voice cold and final. I can't even look at you right now. You've done something unforgivable, and I don't care what excuses you have. You're not the man I thought you were. You've lost my trust, and you've lost any chance of redemption." As the judge gavelled the session to a close, it was clear that Cole's life was about to unravel. His illness, his lies, and his manipulation had all been exposed, and the consequences were far greater than he could have ever imagined. Here's an expanded, emotionally charged narrative based on the plot points you've shared about Kyle, Claire, Audra, Victor, and Chelsea. The story dives into their interactions, motivations, and the undercurrents of manipulation and power struggles in the young and the restless universe. It's designed to keep readers on the edge of their seats, exploring the complex relationships and the tense atmosphere surrounding the upcoming events. The morning sun cast a soft glow over Genoa City as Kyle Abbott sat across from Claire Newman in their living room. He had just returned from a meeting with Audra Charles, and the weight of the conversation was still fresh in his mind. Audra's plans for the Dumas event in Nice were taking shape, and she was pushing hard for him to attend. She had been relentless, but Kyle couldn't deny that there was something enticing about the idea of going, something about the challenge it presented. "I spoke with Audra," Kyle said, his voice cautious as he watched Claire's expression. "She wants me to come to Nice with her. She's already working on the details, and I think she has something big planned for the event. She's not taking no for an answer." Claire's brow furrowed slightly, her concern evident. "Kyle, you have to be careful with her. Audra's got a way of getting under your skin, making you think things are one way when they're really not." Her tone was protective, but there was an underlying worry in her words. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "I know, Claire. I know. But this could be an opportunity one can't pass up. I have to think about Jabot, about my future. And as much as I hate to admit it, Audra's right about the impact this event could have on my career." Claire took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she absorbed his words. "You're right," she said, her voice quieter now. "It could be a great opportunity. But you also have to think about the bigger picture. Audra's not just asking you to come along for fun. She's playing a game, and you're a part of it." Kyle hesitated, the tension between his duty to his career and his loyalty to Claire pulling him in different directions. He knew she was right. Audra was never just about business. She was always about power, control, and manipulation. But even knowing that, Kyle couldn't help but feel the pull of the event in Nice. The idea of mingling with power players, gaining influence, and furthering his career was too tempting to ignore. "I'll be careful, I promise," Kyle said, his voice softening. "But this isn't just about her. This is about me, Claire. I need to do this. I need to show I'm more than just the Abbott family heir." Claire's expression softened, her love for him evident in her gaze. "I understand, Kyle," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of resignation and support. "But promise me you'll keep your eyes open. Audra has an agenda, and it's not just about Jabot. She wants something from you, something she's not going to give up easily." Kyle nodded, his mind still racing with the possibilities of what this trip could mean. "I will. I'll stay sharp. I know how Audra operates. But I'm not doing this just for her. I'm doing it for me." Claire's eyes searched his, and for a brief moment, the room felt heavy with unspoken emotions. She knew this was a turning point, a moment when their lives were about to shift in ways neither of them could predict. But she had always supported Kyle, even when it meant letting him make his own decisions. And if this was what he needed to do, she would stand by him, even if it meant a little distance between them. "So, you're really going?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle nodded. "Yeah. I'm going. I'll make sure to be careful. I'll come back to you, Claire. I'm not getting lost in this game. Not again." Across town, Victor Newman sat in his office, his mind racing with the complexities of his latest schemes. The Dumas event in Nice was just around the corner, and he needed to ensure that everything fell into place. He wasn't one to leave anything to chance, especially when there were so many pieces in play. As he sat alone, contemplating his next move, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice as composed as ever. The door opened, and Chelsea Lawson walked in, her heels clicking against the floor. She was dressed impeccably, but her expression was guarded. Victor could see that she was here for a purpose. A purpose he wasn't entirely sure he trusted. "Victor," Chelsea greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been thinking about how we can strengthen our position in the upcoming months. I've got some ideas that could be beneficial for both of us." Victor raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. Chelsea was always one to play the long game, and he knew her ideas could be valuable. But he also knew that nothing ever came without a price when it came to Chelsea. She wasn't exactly known for doing things out of pure altruism. "Go on," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Chelsea took a step closer, her tone shifting to one of quiet persuasion. "I think I can help you with the Dumas situation, Victor. I know things haven't exactly been smooth sailing, but I have the resources to get the information you need. I've got connections. If you want to push your agenda with Dumas, I can make sure you have the leverage." Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. He had always known that Chelsea had a certain appeal. She wasn't afraid to do what was necessary to get ahead, and that made her a valuable asset. But she was also unpredictable, and Victor had learned over the years that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford.